Okay, we're going to be talking about style and characteristics for Impressionism. And one of the main things is that it's going to completely reject the formal salon system that had been in place during our previous units, especially Unit 6. Impressionist artists actually have a very different style from one another. So when we lump them together, it's really unique because it's really they're just living at the same time period, but they're painting very differently and have very different subject matters. But one thing they do have in common often is the fact that they are interested in the play of light on their paintings. So, but in April 1874, there's a group of artists that include Paul Cézanne, Edgar Degas, Edouard Monet, Marisol, Camille Pissarro, and Auguste Renoir. They exhibited together in Paris under the title of Anonymous Incorporation of Artists, Painters, Sculptors, Engravers, etc. Camille Pissarro, and he's a man, by the way, he organized the group along the lines that advocated by anarchists who urged citizens to band together into self-supporting grassroots organizations rather than relying on state-sanctioned institutions. Pissarro envisioned the society as a mutual aid group for artists who oppose the state-funded salons because they're not going to get any money from the salon commissions. The artists, in a sense, couldn't afford to wait for an annual salon jury selection, so they needed to show and sell their work before the jury selection happened and didn't want to wait around for possibly or more likely a rejection of what they created. So this is the art of the industrialized and urban Paris at the time. And the Impressionists were considered the most famous group among the group members. But like I said, all artists can be lumped into this. In all, there are about 30 members agreed to not submit anything to the Salon that year, which had often rejected their work in the past. And so this was a declaration of independence from the Academy and an attempt to get the public's attention directly because they wanted them to see their art as well. Their exhibition received some positive reviews, but mostly bad reviews. And in response, particular, it was to the painting at the bottom right, which is Monet's Impression Sunrise. They they tried to ask him for what the title was, and he didn't really have one. But then he, off the cuff said, well, it's an impression of sunrise. And that's where the term Impressionism comes from. It's the idea of if you were to look up at a scene and then look away, what do you remember about that scene? You have an impression in your mind, but you may not have details. And so that's what Impressionism is for many of those artists. And so that's where Impressionism comes from. Monet was derided by critics because he had fast, open brushstrokes and an unfinished look to his painting. The Impressionist works to critics looked like quick sketches that an artist would use as an aid to make a masterpiece in the studio later. Monet and his colleagues embraced the term Impressionism, though, because it really did appropriately describe their aim at rendering the instantaneous impression and a fleeting moment in paint. 7 more Impressionist exhibitions would be held between 1876 and 1886, with membership of the group growing slightly with each exhibit. The relative success of these exhibits prompted other artists to organize their own alternatives to the Salon, and by 1900, this independent exhibition and gallery system had all but eradicated the French Academy Salon system. It took the French a long time to appreciate Impressionist work, and as a result, most of the Impressionist collections are owned either in the United States or in the hands of foreign collectors. So the subject matter of most of them is either landscape, leisure, or modern life. very different from Manet, because Manet and the realism people, they wanted to challenge society and question political order of the day, and that's not what the Impressionism want. Instead, they painted, well, really pretty pictures of the upper middle class at leisure in the countryside and in the city. And although they'll several of them will paint rural scenes, the point of their view is that it would be a city person on a holiday. Impressionists challenged the emphasis of given to a traditional subject matter and exalted a momentary glimpse of a scene. So for characteristics, they clearly are influenced by the realist for the momentary quality and also using contemporary subject matter. So Impressionists are related to Courbet and Manet in the idea that they want to capture nature and capture what you actually see, but they are more concerned with the fleeting color as it exists in nature. Just like if you were to watch a sunrise or a sunset, how the colors in the skies change over time, with it, even with just in a few minutes, that's what they're actually trying to capture. They deliberately avoided the tedium of an academic program for painting with its elaborate preparatory drawings and underpaintings. Um, the Impressionists sought to capture a moment quickly right before the light changed. One way they do this is with pure color. And the reason why they can get pure color is an invention that isn't necessarily talked about or is obvious, but the way that they got pigment now is now going to be sold in tubes like we have today. If you're a painter, you go and buy acrylics paints or other type of paint that you want, you could buy it at a store. And now that's what they could do. So they had a whole uh, way to create color without needing to grind pigment, add the binder, and then make sure that it's blended just right. Oftentimes they would just put pure color and then blend as they painted, which is the case with Impression Sunrise right here. So he would put like red and then yellow and then blend it until it looked orange for his colors. Okay, let's see. They often do not see black or shadows in Impressionist work because their color theory emphasizes an appearance of color. It is related to the development of photography. Just as the image passes through a lens and makes an impression on the paper, it will do the same thing with the eyeball. By embracing the idea of subject matter is less important than depicting what the eye perceives, and that painting should be as closely as possible to represent what the eye sees, the Impressionist painters are clearly related to earlier realist painters. Yet their works look very different because realist and the Impressionist interests are different. It's how the eye sees for the Impressionism rather than the subject matter they're trying to actually capture. Another thing is this French word right here is called en plein air, and that means that they are going to paint outside. And that's something, like I said, with having the tubes and having the ability to bring a studio with them outside, that's something that the other artists in the past hadn't necessarily had. Even with Courbet's Stonebreakers, he got the old man and the young man to come back to his studio to paint them. So the en plein air and painting outdoors gives that idea that they can capture the light because they're able to see, okay, that's the color I want to get, and try to get that pure color onto the canvas. And that's, like I said, the invention of those collapsible metal tubes for oil paint due to the Industrial Revolution allowed for the artists to conveniently pack and take with them the stuff they need to create. They had to do speed and spontaneity, again, because they're trying to capture a moment. And so, for example, if you look at these pictures right here, they're all of the same cathedral in Rouen, which is another Monet series. And he basically sometimes would have like up to 8 canvases. And at a certain time, he'd be working on the first one. And then as the light changed, he moved to the second one. And then the third one as it got more bright. And then as it got darker. And so he has, especially Monet, has a series of paintings like the water lilies that will show how light and it will change over time on the exact same scene. The Green Bridge, or the Japanese bridge in Monet's gardens, is a very good example of that. Also, one of the things that really helps is this arbitrary cutting off of figures at a frame's edge. And that is highly inspired by photography because it sometimes allows for visually unbalanced composition, and it also will compress the illusion of depth and assert its flatness. And in 1867, the Paris International Exposition mounted the first show of Japanese prints in Europe. And so, let me make sure I'm on the right thing. I think I'm repeating stuff. No, not really. Okay, so I'm kind of just moving past the arbitrary cutting of frames and at the frame's edge. I'm going to talk about that when I show you guys the Degas pieces. And then flattening spatial effects. Make these does not necessarily show, it's not trompe-l'oeil. It doesn't look like an actual, like what it looks like outside your window. It's as if you're capturing a moment in time. The most widely known artist in the Impressionist style is obviously Monet. And we're gonna, like I've showed you Monet already, and then I'm gonna show you guys a few more things about Monet as well. Edgar Degas, who actually isn't in our 250, neither is Renoir. Both of them are very important Impressionist artists. And then Mary Cassatt, another female, one of the very few we're studying up until the 20th century. She is going to be part of the Impressionists as well, and kind of comes under the tutelage of Edgar Degas. Going back to the art show that was done in 1872 when we talked about Japanese May, most artists before this knew little about Japanese culture or painting, but one of the things that really did impress upon them, so to speak, was that it was really painting was simple, transitory, and everyday subjects that is actually appealing in a decorative way, that you could put it up in your house. And so it also had elongated pictorial forms. Japanese prints would have asymmetrical compositions, often from an aerial perspective, and space was emptied of all but abstract elements of color and line. The focus is really on a single decorative idea. Okay. This is, here's some of how it's affected on the Japanese side. Down here you could see here is Shige's bridge, and then here is Monet's image of the Japanese bridge. We can see this is Mary Cassatt's The Letter. Down here, this one is The Letter, and she definitely looks like in more of an Asian perspective. This is Toulouse-Lautrec, and you can even see he's advertising for this to go to. He was really part of the Moulin Rouge scene. And then here are the different Japanese prints that will influence them. Okay, and then obviously the water lily scenes. There are so many of Monet's water lily scenes. And I'm not really going to show you guys this too much because it's long. Let me show you. It's not in color but here's his garden in the background. And so one of the things that was actually pretty cool about Monet is his garden in Giverny is so amazing. So I wanted to show you guys, these are the pictures I took, and this is just a small amount of pictures that I took from Monet's gardens. But he saw himself as a gardener first and a painter second. And so you could see that even 100 years later, this is the Japanese bridge. It's a beautiful and amazing garden that still exists today, and you should go. Okay, that's Impressionism style.